Hello everyone, welcome to the Concept Hacks. So today in this video we are going to discuss about the myocardial thickness and function. So myocardial thickness means what is the thickness of the myocardium in our both the ventricles and both the atria. Okay, so here let's draw the diagram first. So this is our typical diagram of our heart. So for example, this is our heart, and first we'll go for the right atrium, then we'll go for left atrium, then right ventricle, then left ventricle. So we know the right atrium, the thickness of right atrium, we know what is it, it's 2 to 3 millimeter. And thickness of left atrium also same thickness, is also 2 to 3 millimeter. Why it is 2 to 3 millimeter in both the atrium? So if it is a 2 to 3 millimeter, then it will be almost, for example, I am drawing, it's not a 2 to 3 millimeter, I am just drawing with the same, number, same thickness of both the atrium. I am trying to maintain the same thickness. So this is our so this is our both the atrium, their thickness. So this is the thickness of our both the atrium, their thickness is same throughout the atrium. So both the atrium, they have same thickness, so they should have the same thickness, because when the atria contracts, this is our right atrium, this is our left atrium. Why it is the same thickness? Because when both the atria contract, they contract simultaneously, and their main role is what? What is the basic role, basic function of our both the atrium? Their main function is to supply the content from atria to the next, their beneath chamber, which is present in our lower chambers of our heart, means ventricles. So when they contract, all the content from them, it will definitely come into the ventricles, which is present beneath of both the atrium. That's why there, so blood will have to travel from very less distance, because from here to the next chamber, which is present below here, it is very short distance. That's why they need to contract with less pressure. As they need to contract with a very less pressure, that's why what happened, that thickness of the atrium wall is not necessarily needs to be more thicker than the ventricles, because when ventricle contract, their purpose, their main role is to supply the content from towards all over the body in case of left ventricle, but in case of right ventricle it is different. They need to supply their content from inside her to the outside her. That's why their wall thickness will be more as compared to our atrium. So let's draw the thickness of our atria. So this is the thickness of our atrium. So atrium thickness will be more. So if we see clearly, this is the right ventricle, this is the left ventricle. So in case of right ventricle, the thickness is less as compared to the thickness of our left ventricle. That thing I'll discuss, that this is the right ventricle, their thickness is 4 to 5 millimeter, but in case of left ventricle, their thickness is almost 10 to 14 millimeter. We need to discuss about what is the basic purpose of this difference. Okay, so here when right atrium and left atrium contract, then the blood will definitely come into the right ventricle from the right atrium and into the left ventricle from the left atrium. So when from left atrium, all the content which is coming from our lungs through the pulmonary veins to our left atrium and through the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, deoxygenated blood reaches to our right atrium. So here in the left side we have oxygenated blood and the left side we have deoxygenated blood. So when both the atria contract, they push their content into the respective chambers which is present beneath of both the chambers. So that's why they need to, as the blood travels a short distance, that's why their wall thickness not necessarily to be so much thick as compared to our ventricles, because when it is this purpose that the contraction is definitely fulfilled and it is easily fulfilled by this small or less thickened walls of our atrium, because they need to push with a less pressure, because the blood it's already present inside the right atrium and it is already tends to go into the both the ventricles, because ventricle is present beneath and it is present inferior to our both the atrium. So as it is present inferiorly, and atrium is present superiorly, from superior to inferior direction, automatically with the help of gravity, blood tends to come into the both the ventricles. So with a very less pressure when our atria gives, then all the content will easily come into our both the ventricles. That's why the body, their ventricle wall thickness is not necessarily to be so much thick. The next concept is why their thick our left ventricle and right ventricle and left ventricle, their wall thickness is different. But in case of right atrium and left atrium, their wall thickness is same. But in case of ventricle, why it is different? Main reason of this difference is our right ventricle, it pushes its content with the help of pulmonary trunk to our lungs. So it will definitely push all the content from right atrium to both the lungs. So this is the left lung, this is the right lung, and this is the left lung. So this is the left lung, so this is the left pulmonary artery, and this is the right lung towards this direction. That's why it is called this portion is called right pulmonary artery, and this portion is called left pulmonary artery. And this portion from where this is the pulmonary valve is attached, that portion when it's bifurcated up to this direction, that much distance is called a pulmonary trunk. So this is the another concept. So our main question is why the wall thickness is different. So right atrium, when it receives all the content, right ventricle, when it receives all the content from right atrium, the main function of right ventricle is when it contracts, it push all the content to the lungs which is present nearby of our heart. This is our lung. So our lung, both the lung, it is present just nearby of our heart. So when right ventricle contract, its main function is to push all the content to the nearby heart. So it is also a less distant as compared to the other body parts to which our left ventricle is going to push its content. So listen carefully. When right ventricle contract, it pushes all its content to the lung through the pulmonary trunk and through the pulmonary arteries, and our lung is present, our both the lungs are present nearby of our heart. So our main distance, this blood which is present, deoxygenated blood which is present in our right ventricle, it will travel a very short distance as compared to the blood which is present in our left ventricle, which is the oxygenated blood. This blood which is present inside our left ventricle is going to travel throughout the body. That's why our left ventricle has to contract itself with so much pressure so that all the content will definitely move through the aorta to all over the body parts of our human body. Means when left ventricle contract and when right ventricle contract, both the chamber contract simultaneously, just like the both the atrium. So when both the ventricle contract simultaneously, when the right ventricle only needs to push its content to the lungs, which is present nearby, and our only left ventricle, when it pushes all its content towards the body part to maintain their blood flow, the thickness of their walls are different. Because if left ventricle also the same body thickness or same chamber thickness just like the right ventricle, when the same pressure applied, then what will happen? Left ventricle cannot transfer all the content through the aorta towards the all over the body, because left ventricle needs to push all the content so that in a single contraction all the blood have to go out through the aorta towards the body, because next cycle is it's going to be ready from the left atrium to the right ventricle. So that's why our right ventricle will contract and left ventricle also contract simultaneously, but the purpose of right ventricle contraction is that it needs to transfer all its content from right ventricle to her lungs, both the lungs, which is present nearby. Means all the content will travel a very short distance, just like the right atrium from to the right ventricle or left atrium to the right ventricle, because there also the content will travel in the short distance. That's why their wall thickness is less, because they needs to apply a very little pressure. So that much of wall thickness is sufficient to create that pressure. But just like the right ventricle also the same thing. As compared to left ventricle, right ventricle pressure, wall pressure is or contraction pressure is less, because that less pressure is sufficient to transfer all the content from right ventricle to the both the lungs, because both the lungs are present very nearby in our heart, from our heart, basically very nearby, because both the lungs are present almost at the same level or at the very short distance this blood will going to travel. But left ventricle, these blood have to travel throughout the body parts from the aorta. When our left ventricle contract, the single contraction, all the content will definitely go out from the aorta to our all over the body parts, so that's why our left ventricle has to create much pressure as compared to the right ventricle, and that pressure can be made only possible when the thickness of their chambers are more. That's why left ventricle has more wall thickness as compared to right ventricle. Okay, hope you like this video. Thank you.